we're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Michael O'Connor. I'm from the University of Chicago, and I'm a physician anesthesiologist and intensivist. And I was a longtime friend of Richard Cook's and a co-worker in the Cognitive Technologies Lab at the University of Chicago. Today we have his wife here, Karen, and we have a fantastic panel of speakers. David Woods couldn't make it because of medical issues, so David, professor at Ohio State, is going to talk to us via a recorded PowerPoint. Then we're going to have Terry Fairbanks from Georgetown and MedStar come and talk to us. And then Shauna Perry injured out, and so she's not going to be here today. Chris Neiman, who worked with us in the Cognitive Technologies Lab, is going to be with us as well today. Emily Patterson at Ohio State, who at one time worked with us. The CTL will be one of our speakers, and Manuel Donkin will be our last speaker. We're going to leave a little bit of time at the end for people to ask questions or talk about Richard. So without further ado.
Thank you for joining us in this session to explore not simply the past, but the future through the work and contributions of Richard Cook, who was there in the early days and had to fight battle after battle, not just then, but over the next 30 years as we tried to develop, guide, and empower the patient safety movement. As William Faulkner said, his contributions matter to you because the past isn't really dead. It's not over. It's not even past. So your challenges ahead are greatly informed by the work and contributions that he made. So the quick overview is patient safety actually started with anesthesia safety through an insurance crisis. This started in the late 80s with the rise of the Anesthesia Patient Safety Foundation. And Richard became involved very early in that as he had finished his MD after starting out life in computer science. He thought he would be applying computer technology to make healthcare better. And he was in a research role with the Department of Anesthesia at Ohio State in the late 80s when I arrived there. And he was able to participate in many of the early aspects of how to make anesthesia safety improve significantly. Now that then led to the one of the main inputs into the rise of the general patient safety movement, which centered around the two Annenberg meetings in the middle of the 90s. That quickly led to the launch of the National Patient Safety Foundation in 96, where Richard, served as a board member and was active in many of the early projects. From that, he became key in the Veterans Administration's adoption of the new patient safety directions and principles, right, and helped start and lead the GAP Center for the VA of Ohio, which was the first patient safety campaign at the scale of a statewide major healthcare system. He went on from Ohio State as a working clinician in anesthesiology at the University of Chicago Medical Center, as we'll hear, where his lab focused on doing the cognitive work to make cognitive work in healthcare go. And it was particularly important how to learn from incidents, how to investigate incidents and adverse events, how to learn from them and go beyond, as we had outlined in the Tale of Two Stories, when the Patient Safety Foundation got started, a predecessor to what you might have heard of today as Safety 1, Safety 2. He went on to be a professor in Sweden and then back to OSU as the era of resilience and resilience engineering exploded, where his talk here on Bone is Resilience is a great example of the new ideas that overturn many of our preconceived notions. His tiny paper, nano paper from 98 as part of the patient safety campaigns, both with the NPSF and with the VA, How Complex Systems Fail, in 2 or 3 pages, has recently exploded in the last 7 years in software engineering, where it has a major impact. So where did we meet? It was in late 88, 89, as I arrived at Ohio State. I had received a call from someone who was active in anesthesia safety to say, hey, you should connect to these people because the work you're doing describing AI and automation and people and emergencies and control rooms applies to the operating room. So we met. Richard said, hey, I have a study of an adverse event. I'm using cognitive work concepts. The title was Cognitive Tunnel Vision, right? Understanding an adverse event in the operating room. And yet, no one knew what to do with it. No one would really publish it. He was able to give a talk, but where did they stick it? Neuromuscular transmission? Well, we built on that and started to do what? Study more incidents. We did that through studies of the morbidity and mortality meeting, focused on expertise, even though it was a study of incidents. And then we did it because what happened is more adverse, or in our case, luckily, near misses occurred in the operating room involving new technology and automation in the form of infusion devices and other operating room new devices. And so we were able to study the human automation interaction, all of the kinds of human-computer interaction deficiencies that are still widespread in medical devices. So we were collecting, cases, building a corpus of cases to study expertise, and we got an informal notification one day that something interesting happened in the operating room. And so we had an interesting set of folk reactions to these kinds of incidents of it's human error or it's an untrustworthy device, but very general and vague. So we did an investigation. Why? Because exactly 1 week later, a second incident happened with the device now captured in the impossible state. Think about that, right? We have to not touch it, yet figure out how this opaque, complex, full of multiple modes, hidden modes, device actually worked, despite the fact the interface and the image it presented to the user hid most of what it did. Now, the reactions to stakeholders were interesting as well, right? As many of the stakeholders tried to downplay this. We were able to publish many studies from this corpus, but also to do other investigations, follow it up with other lines of research, even redesigning the interfaces to make them transparent and directable, observable and directable. Yet, still today, these kinds of devices cause problems. Well, the transition from anesthesia safety to patient safety happened right in the mid-90s due to a series of shock events that made the public challenge the standard stakeholders in the healthcare delivery systems. Libby Zion, a wrong leg incident in Florida, Dana-Farber University, chemotherapy overdoses, a small child dying from solution swap, medication misadministration, criminalization attempts such as the Colorado nurses. Right? A variety of things shocked the different organizations and stakeholders to come together in a new way. And these were the basic tenets in the era of good intentions. Adopt a systems approach, how breakdowns occur in an increasingly complex world. Move beyond the culture of blame to support an open flow of information, because learning about vulnerabilities in advance of adverse events is what matters, not tabulating more of adverse events of the same type. And of all this depended on building new kinds of collaborations and partnerships across stakeholders, including us. Human factors people became a positive and critical aspect of the collaborations that we wanted to launch and began to launch in those mid to later 90s. What did Richard emphasize through all this? It was constantly learning how to learn, how to look at incidents, pre-adverse event, adverse events, how to build foresight about the changing shape of risk so that changes could be made. And this meant there was an opposition to the oversimplifications, that this was simply a story of counting and reducing the number of errors that occurred. So learning how to learn became the main thing. And Richard had a great way to do this by putting out non-traditional publications, cards we would hand out in the pre-internet days, right, that highlighted key things. What are these key principles? Well, we had already published in 1994 Behind Human Error, the first edition. And so the ideas in that, some of the figures in that, all became critical as we tried to teach and share and demonstrate what it meant to learn, what you could learn, and how you could change. This culminated in a meeting we held with a variety of people, right? The product is a tale of two stories, right? It anticipates safety 1, safety 2, and it's trying to shift people from the simple first story of human error to understand a complex system and its vulnerabilities. Well, you know that's not really what happened, right? The 2000 IOM report came out, and it was about counting and reducing counts of errors. So here's an editorial Richard wrote in The Lancet in 2000, right, saying, this isn't going to work out the way you think. The second story is understanding the sharp ends, how people are a source of resilient performance in a complex, messy system, right, is the theme that still applies today. Well, in 2000, what else came out? One of the papers that was launching our efforts, which started in that 2000, 2003 era of moving to resilience engineering and the shift, instead of counting errors, to supporting and building sources for resilient performance and an inherently and changing complex system, where people are the critical source of resilient performance. And this became, how do you close gaps? And how do people close gaps in content and producing continuity of care when things go well? And that paper came out in a critical medical journal. So simply trying to point out, and the rest of the panels there with you will go through many of the kinds of projects and insights and first-time studies that Richard led and participated in. So do you know his work? Do you know the tale of two stories? How complex systems fail? 9 steps moving forward, the GAPS paper, identifying side effects, especially the afterwards project, because doing independent, in-depth analyses of critical events is central to learning. There are many more papers like Being Bumpable, Going Solid that you can look at. They matter to you now. One in particular I must call your attention to is his dissenting statement on health IT and safety, coming from an IOM committee he was on. And this is still relevant, especially today with the recent events involving the Cerner IT infrastructure and the role software can play in safety. So here we are. You are here today. Here we are together in this meeting, right? And your activities and roles in different healthcare organizations exist because others fought. We fought with narrow interests. We fought misconceptions and folk models. And we have battled zombie ideas that appeal, even though they are scientifically disprovable. These battles are far from over, even as more changes occur and shocks continue to happen. The past isn't dead. It's not even past. Will you battle as hard as the people who fought to get us even this far? Well, Richard Cook's work is still central. All of it, almost all of it, could be written now as if new. It is a source of insight. It is a guide to paths forward as you face new problems and challenges as healthcare continues to change and our repair projects can't keep up with the messiness and gaps that arise in healthcare. It's your turn now. enjoy and learn about the ways Richard Cook's work can help you. And good luck.
I'm going to give my most important qualification, student of Richard Cook. So I'm going to, I think this is a great introduction that David gave us, and thank you, Anne, for being here, and thank you, Karen, for being here especially. I'm not going to talk about David's work because I think today we have all been influenced by Richard's work. We've all been influenced by Richard's work. David just gave us a really nice overview of it, and I think it's going to inspire all of us to go back and start looking at it again. I just saw some things I haven't read for 15 or 20 years that have influenced me. So we'll all do that, and so what I thought I would do is just talk about featuring some ways that Richard's work have really influenced me. I'm going to give 5 points, and 4 of them professional and 1 of them very personal. So when I started in this field, I know many of you know, I came in as a safety engineer and then went to medical school. So my head was exploding when I realized how behind healthcare was in safety. And Richard's work was really literally the first haven that I found of a medical center of work that understood why my head was exploding. And that was in the 1990s. Many of you probably remember this, but those of you know the CTL Lab website, where Richard and team, many of whom are here, posted all of the amazing influential papers that they were writing. The vast majority of these were coming from Richard's mind. And it was the first open access that there was, because Richard just put all the PDFs up or the scans or whatever it was, and you could find any important influential paper that you needed on this website. So that's number 1, is how early this influence was starting, and I think David just did a really nice job of highlighting to us how, in a very positive way, how much Richard's voice was disruptive and saying a lot that we all wanted to have heard. My father was an English professor, and when I was a young kid, I remember seeing this mimeograph of a poster of a lecture he was given, and it didn't mean anything to me now, but it means a lot to me now. I mean then, but it means a lot to me now. The title of the talk was, "American Poets Have a Lot to Say, ... They just can't." And that's how I felt my whole career. I have a lot to say about what's wrong, but Richard was really able to say it in a way that compelled a lot of us, and more importantly, compelled the people that those of us in this room would say, don't get it. The counting of errors, all of the things that David just gave a great overview on. So number 2 is resilience engineering. Richard made a big difference in a lot of disciplines that bring safety into healthcare in a meaningful way. But I think resilience engineering was a really important piece of that, and that'll circle back to my number 5 in a minute. David talked about this a little bit just now, but the paper, How Complex Systems Fail, and I think I wrote down as David was saying it because I think he said it better than I planned to say it. But I don't see where I wrote it down. But anyway, David just said that this quote from Richard about how the people cause the resilience in the system. And that is the opposite, for those of you really in it and following what we're seeing today in this new wave of I love the title paper, Who Killed Patient Safety? There's a new wave. Back from 2000, we had a big effort. Now this sudden, there's a lot of new heat and effort on this. And what are they doing? They're just trying to push more of the same that didn't work for 20 years. And so I think we really need to think of these kinds of messages now. They become more important. And what David just said was so meaningful. They matter to you now. Richard's work matters to us now so much. So his foundation, being a founder of the resilience engineering field, is something that really matters to us. Number 3 is something that came in his Tale of Two Stories series, he lecture and paper and all that kind of, that I think is something that's really misunderstood and missed in healthcare that Richard really articulated well. And that is, we have this kind of romance with technology in healthcare, where we believe putting a new alert in the system, or put it in the EHR, or hardwire it. How many times do you all hear that? will solve the problem. And we're 20 years past when Richard started talking about this, and 10 years past when he really said it in a meaningful way. But for all of the solutions that technology helps us mitigate problems with, it introduces new risks. So that's number 3 that I think we really need to remember Richard's contribution for. Number 4 is huge, and I don't think we can say enough about it, and David also noted this. And Richard was the foundation of many organizations that go on to influence us today. I think among all of the healthcare organizations that have really tried to take innovative looks at safety, the Anesthesia Patient Safety Foundation is really, there's no group out there that's done better than that. Very early on, they seemed to recognize that they had a cockpit and look at how others designed a cockpit, but they introduced so much as a group, and Richard was just such an important part of that organization. And then the second is the National Patient Safety Foundation. You know, there are different national healthcare-based safety groups. National Patient Safety Foundation folded into the Institute for Healthcare Improvement, and I think that it goes up and down in terms of effectiveness, but it remains today one of the very few influential ways for us to get to the nurse and doctor out there who have never had any training in safety, but they were good at a PI project, so they got named a quality and safety leader. And then we need to influence them and teach them how to do real safety. And I feel like that organization that Richard helped found is one of the few ways that we can have that voice today. And so number 5 is the personal thing, and that is the human that Richard was. And I said that I'd come back to resilience engineering. Richard, you all know he was a true academic founder of the thought around resilience engineering. And in 2013, I had the opportunity to chair a resilience engineering and healthcare meeting at the National Academies. And Richard, I got the people much smarter than me, like Richard, to help me figure out how to do it in an effective way. Richard helped. And then we had to, as part of this, we wrote up a 4-page National Academies summary that was required as using the facilities and all that, and we thought that would have influence. And Richard's the one that said, you know, Terry, we've got to write a paper about this. We have to get this out in the real literature. So I said, you're right. He said, why don't you be first author and do the first draft and get it to me. I said, okay, I'll get it to you in a few weeks. So this is Richard. A week later, he sent me what he said was a rough draft, and then I read it, and I didn't see how I could even contribute. It was such a perfectly articulated paper of everything that we had talked about and thought about it, and then many things that I hadn't even thought about. We had some smart authors with us. I tried to do some edits, then I sent it back to him with his name as the first author, which was the deserved author order, and he absolutely refused, the human being that Richard Cook is, and he said, Terry, you're the one that brought the conference together, and you're at a different point in your career. You should be first author. I'll just be senior author. Now, I didn't deserve any of this. I'm telling you all right now, if you download this paper, this is Richard's work. And it remains today one of my most referenced papers. And I will say one of my very proudest papers from the author. I'll just read to you the authors. It was Fairbanks, Weirs, Woods, Holnagel, Gleesick, and Cook. Thank you, Richard.
For not using Richard's preferred presentation technique. Anybody remember what it was? Overhead transparencies. Yeah. Why was that? Because he'd continually be thinking about the problem and the issue and would start to articulate it in real time. I don't have that benefit there, but I'll be happy to share my experience because, in my humble opinion, Richard Cook was a radical in the truest sense of the word. Going to the root of what concerned him. He saw what others didn't, even though the evidence was right in front of them. How pediatric patients who are less sick are bumped from ICU beds for a sicker patient, which no parent would want to hear. How artifacts such as the resident sign-out sheet and the master schedule for anesthesia staff assignments could serve as a way in to understand these complex and emergent systems through a grounded understanding, how all sharp-end operators' decisions are made under uncertainty and are in effect bets based on their understanding of the situation, and how technical work influences the provision of care, even though it's widely dismissed as just the way we do things here. Well, this is a session on patient safety and Richard's insights, and so I'd like to share a few of his thoughts from 2013, which is entitled "The System's View of Safety." There are at least 4 obstacles to improving safety. So this is just, it's not a cakewalk. You know, this is, as David pointed out, as Terry pointed out, there are lots of barriers to be able to get this sort of thing done. Richard pointed out that safety is an emergent result of interactions among elements that happen on the fly during the operation of the system. It's complex, and the addition of defenses makes it more complex. Its large size resists general models or solutions, so the quick fix will not work. And it's not a design system. It's an aggregation. Well, all right, in the face of all of those, what can we do about it? His recommendation is accept and acknowledge what healthcare is, what patient safety issues are. Examine how workers understand and try to manage their situation. Pay attention to what makes work hard and what trade-offs are required. And then strive to make work easier and support those trade-offs. And he included these references at the end of that paper in 2013, Lucian Leap's initial paper in the Harvard Medical Practice Study, and also the NRC report on To Err is Human. And he also included his own publications. So if you have not read these publications, I recommend them to you because Richard pointed to them as the work that really deserves attention to understand patient safety, including the NPSF report, A Tale of Two Stories, which David referred to and also Terry did. The Ashgate Text Behind Human Error. Going Solid, the paper that he co-authored with Jens Rasmussen that appeared in Quality and Safety in Healthcare. And then finally, the special issue essay in an IEEE study on technical work in healthcare entitled The Messy Details. Well, for 7 years, I had the good fortune to be a member of Richard's Cognitive Technologies Lab at the University of Chicago Medical Center, Department of Anesthesia and Critical Care. It was one of the most remarkable 7 years of my life. And among many projects we worked on at CTL, there are a few that show how we approached patient safety. You may recognize that smiley guy, the third from the he's here as the chair of this session. There's also another smiley guy that's right behind the camera here. He's from the right. And it was my good fortune to be able to work together with them and do some of the things that we'll describe here in a second. Richard saw how information technology is a mismatch for clinical care. He studied the most widely used IT in healthcare, the infusion pump, and he developed state diagrams overseeing usability assessments that showed how overly simple interfaces hide hundreds, not just some, but hundreds of states that no clinician could fathom. He also showed how an observable, controllable interface, like you see on the screen here at left, could show both the results of past actions and future implications for a clinician's choices in the present, making work easier and also showing trade-offs that are made. Take a look at the illustration in the center there. You might be thinking, what the heck is that? He built a microprocessor-controlled gravimetron from the menagerie of parts and equipment in his lab storage room, because no data were available to show how a variation in syringe pump fluid delivery rates can affect the sedation of delicate, fragile infants in the pediatric ICU. His 2005 abstract for the American Society of Anesthesiologists described how it accurately measures time to start drug delivery, the time to steady state rate of infusion, zero drug delivery time, aspiration volume, and bolus volume associated with changes in infusion pump height. Pump flow rates do vary, and to a degree that are clinically significant. The upper chart that you see there, on the far side of the screen, shows an infusing at a rate of 4 cc's an hour. Elevating the pump 50 centimeters produces a bolus that has a large surge of 0.12 mLs over 5 seconds, and then lowering the pump 50 centimeters results in no flow at all, and then a low flow for 2 minutes and 20 seconds. The lower chart shows drug delivery at 2 cc's an hour begins within 6.5 minutes if the pump is purged at the start of an infusion, but failure to purge the pump delays the start of drug delivery to 20 minutes. Why did he go to this length? Because the proof was not in superficial interface styling, but in data. Data are the reality. Here's some more data. This is a daily account of the patient condition over a month in the pediatric ICU and step-down unit. And you'll see that there are clusters of transfers that are outlined in red at different points through the month. These indicate groups of transfers from the ICU into the step-down unit and out of the step-down unit. Well, the patients that were transferred didn't get healthier as a group. This is a trade-off of the least sick patients who were bumped and moved to make way for arrivals in the OR. And no parent would want to know that their child had been bumped from the pediatric ICU, but it was known among clinicians, but unmentioned. Well, who is sick when it comes to these kinds of decisions? It was based on the number of intravenous meds the patient was on, if they were on vasopressors, and also if they were on a ventilator. Well, using artifacts that the anesthesia coordinators created and clinicians use revealed how they make complex and emergent planning and trade-off decisions every day. A diagram of the research design for that project is shown here on the right. The relationships among the artifacts that support clinician cognitive work and how they're used is shown on the far left here. Analyzing the artifacts that clinicians create and use reveals the trade-offs between care demand, resources to provide care, and developing new artifacts makes their work easier. This is another one of my favorite ones. Emergency departments regularly face workflow challenges, and by coincidence we were studying the same emergency department at the same time that the senior management of the emergency department at the same place were evaluating their own workflow using quality methods. Our research that you'll see here in a second, our research results reflected what makes work hard and the trade-offs that the work requires. And so you'll note on the far side here the complexity of what is shown. Each one of those boxes has notes about what's happening at that particular moment in the flow of work through the system. You'll see the ED management results on the other side. You're closer to me. 3 sets of flow chart illustrations here. Weight, evaluation, discharge home, or admission. Neat and orderly, and as we had it and they didn't. Richards was a constructive criticism born of intellect and a keen sense of how systems do and do not work. He was impatient with quick fixes that were conceived and implemented without any understanding of the underlying problem. He disdained those who acted without understanding and those who acted to create the appearance of doing something responsive. Faced with so many instances of this, he saw how absurd it was to funnel time and energy and money into fruitless pursuits. The physical evidence of this was his lab door that was festooned with cartoons by Gary Larson, including this one. Richard saw how medical organizations perform as a system and deal with adverse outcomes that insightful investigation can improve. It was clear to him that there was always more to an adverse outcome than the easy human error answer that an organization gave as it sought to assign blame. In fact, the operator at the sharp end was not the cause of the problem, but instead the source of resilient performance. Richard Cook could have chosen a more comfortable path and accept an honorific title and adulation. Instead, he took the path of honesty, answering only to the toughest critic, himself. That required courage. Courage to stay the course, to call out absurdity, and pursue what he knew was right. He was able to publish in some venues, as David pointed out, there are very few that were amicable or would be open to his interest, his thinking, and his initiative. And those works endure. We can take from his example for our own lives, but it's more of a challenge than it appears to be. Following his example requires his intellect, and good luck with that. Courage to call out absurdity, and to forsake the need for recognition. During my time as a member of the lab, every day was a privilege. It was an adventure, quirky, revelatory, and never dull. Richard's vision enabled me to sharpen my own and seek the root of what matters, and for that, I'm sincerely grateful. Thank you.
Had the pleasure of working with Richard. I'm just curious. Okay, well, that's so wonderful. Just his legacy right there. So, my name's Emily Patterson. I'm at the Ohio State University. Thank you, Anne. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay.
We can see you too.
What's that?
We can see you also.
That's a good thing. Okay. So my name's Emily Patterson, and I was told by my mother never to marry a doctor or go into medicine. And so I didn't. And so I worked with David Woods, with intelligence analysts in Dayton Air Force Base and NASA Johnson Mission Controllers, and had no intention whatsoever of ever working in healthcare. And I accepted a job from Battelle to continue doing that. And then on Monday, I was like, the FedEx package didn't come, what happened? And they said we had a reduction in force, and you were part of it. And so I walked into Dave Woods, my advisor's, PhD advisor's office and said, I don't have a job anymore. And he said, turn around, Marta Render from the VA is visiting. Richard Cook, myself, and Marta Render are going to start the VA Getting a Patient Safety Center funded by a grant, and do you want to work on that? Okay, so I did. And so I'm still in healthcare. I'm in the College of Medicine as a full professor because Richard brought me in. And I didn't know who this Richard Cook person was. I knew that Dave Woods had somebody he really liked in the College of Medicine, but I didn't work on those projects. And I just felt like I was the luckiest person in the world. I would sit in Dave Woods' office with Richard right next to me, with the door open, and there were a few swear words told. Dave and Richard could get together and be foul-mouthed, but I felt like I got all the insights on everything that was happening in healthcare and how to make it better and what was wrong and what was happening. And I was just so fortunate to have that time with them. And so one of the projects that launched my career was the country did a national experiment with barcode medication administration. So the Congress said in the next year, we're going to implement BCMA in every single one of 124 hospitals and 142 nursing homes in the next year. We're just going to put it in. And I reviewed the training that said all medication errors are going to go to zero because it's a really simple intervention. The only thing that's going to happen is you're going to have a nurse who's giving medications. You add one simple step. All you have to do is scan a barcoded medication, scan a wristband. The system is all-knowing, all-seeing, always correct, and will say green on the scanner light, and then the nurse will know, give if green, red, don't give if not. And literally, I literally reviewed this training, and it said all medication errors will go to zero with this new system. And so what happened was, I was like, oh, this will be a neat system. I can't wait to, learn about it. And Richard Cook was like, come here. And so he wrote this one-page document that I have, and I will share it with you, Karen. He wrote this one-page document, Cognitive Technologies Laboratory Prediction of what will happen with barcode medication administration introduction, based on the work he had done with Dave Woods in the operating room, trying to do electronic systems there. And I was just like, you are so wrong. There's no, you're the biggest Luddite. You're so negative. And so I'm going to share 10 of the predictions with you, and you can judge for yourself. He was pretty right on, So no one in the country, except for Richard and then David, of course, working with him, had anything negative to say about BCMA before it went in. Everyone thought it was going to be awesome. And it's okay, is what I would say. So here are the 10 predictions. And so what I did is based on Richard and David and Marta's guidance, I went and observed people working. So I walked around various acute care nursing homes where this was being used. And so he said that it would impose new workload on users. And I think that very much has been borne out with the BCMA system. It takes more effort. It's not simple to have this extra scan. And it's not just the nurses. The entire pharmacy had to change over from word stock to individual medication labeling, which, we should probably do anyway. But it's not like it was new. There were robots that were introduced that didn't exist before, just to manage the interactions between pharmacy and nursing. Pharmacists had to have nursing views so that they could troubleshoot. There was just all kinds of extra workload for everybody. He said practitioner adaptations would occur, including both system and task tailoring. And so I didn't know those words quite at the time, but now I understand them better, and he's read on both. that nurses are creative, is the way people like to talk about it back then at the bedside, as well as systemic changes, like they increased the windows for how long you could administer a medication, administration windows and beyond time. Then he would say they will try very hard to maintain their old way of doing things. So there were rings that nurses would have that they would wear on their coats that had the wristbands for the patients that they could scan or else taped onto, cardboard things, so they wouldn't have to go into the room before they prepared the medications, because patients generally talk to you when you go in, and you generally want to be in the hallway preparing and thinking about all the medications, preparing them, and so having that simple step of scanning the wristband interrupted the workflow, which, by the way, other systems didn't do. They had the scanning after the preparation. But the way this system was designed, you had to scan before preparing. Batching en masse, that happened. And so you would see people collecting together medications that weren't necessarily ordered for the same times to be given together. Workarounds, they had these cheat sheets. And then this off-the-record bypass. So there was absolutely, with narcotics, a pretty standard practice of like some narcotics in the pockets. Because, for example, a nurse is scanning medications. They send the nurse trainee to go get the narcotics for the patient. If they do that, you can't scan it, because you actually had to have the same person scanning the system as going to the fixes to get the narcotic medication. So you would pre-get your narcotic under your password, keep it in your pocket, and just sort of always have one ahead, so that you could work more quickly. Clumsy automation, it happened. Plenty of examples of where it was very difficult to change an automated scan time of medication that was 10 hours later than it was actually given. And less visibility of operations absolutely happened. He was not perfect. So there were 3 that I claimed did not happen. So there were 3 predictions he made out of 10. And isn't it interesting that this is the order that the memo was? So the first 5 were correct, and then on the 6 to 10, 7 and 10, I think, are the only ones that showed up. So there were a few that didn't happen. I didn't really see any challenges to recovering from like a medication overdose or that sort of stuff, because it was sort of like off to the side. It's like you did your work and then you documented your work, and so it didn't really interfere with the recovery. Absolutely, there were new forms of failure, and absolutely they were difficult to predict. I did not see perverse incentives to use it more. What I did see was perverse incentives to scan ahead. So one of the things that I did see in the nursing home was a nurse open patient drawers, and 3 out of 32 patients had a cup with open medications inside the cup. So clearly, the patient had been out of the room or unconscious or not able to take the medications for whatever reason in the prior shift or sometime before that. And so what do you think happened to that cup? Anyone want to guess?
Waste basket.
Waste basket.
Oh!
Yeah, have channel. In case anyone doesn't know, Anne is just as brilliant as Dave was. So yes, so wastebasket. All 3 went in the wastebasket. Why? Don't pour, don't give, right? So that's what they said. If I don't pour it, I don't give it. That's a nursing licensure violation. And so one of those medications was antibiotics or sepsis. Documented as given on time. How many times does this happen, right? So that was, I was silly enough to not know that the head nurse of the VA was going to call me and demand to know the name of the nurse who did that so that they could be delicensed and fired. And I said, because Richard was brilliant, we had witnesses not self-witnessing on the IRB forms. And so I'm sorry I couldn't tell you. And she's like, oh, good. I didn't want to fire anyone. So anyway, that was one of the things that he knew to do. That error would be more easily lodged. I'm not sure that that really happened. And then adaptations would be partially successful, mainly in local settings. Absolutely, that was the case. So those are all the slides I have on Richard, but I do want to also share one other follow-on from this. Has anyone ever heard of electronic health records? As a concerner? Is anybody aware that barcode medication administration was supposed to be implemented before electronic health records? Because Congress, by bipartisan agreement in Congress, was that we want to do a patient safety thing, and that's what they were going to put in across the country. Did anyone know that? No? So the reason why I know that is because Richard was invited to talk to the group that was going to brief Congress, so an Institute of Medicine, 2-day summit on this, on barcode medication administration, and he said, I don't want only MDs talking. I want PhDs, I want human factors to be considered its own thing, have a PhD talk. And so I was, 27, and I'm briefing basically Congress through these people. And he was powerful enough to get that through. They accepted it. They were pretty nervous about it. But then they looked at our work that I just presented to you about, how bad, the negative side effects of barcode administration. So they said I wasn't allowed to present on BCMA. I could only present on human factors. So I didn't say a thing about barcoding. They only invited positive technologists who had published about the brilliance of these barcoding initiatives and how they had reduced medication errors. And every single one, I think there were like 7 presenters, every single one of them would say, well, I presented my work that's kind of positively spun. Strongly recommend not doing this nationally. And they all had different reasons. One said, well, there's earthquakes and it affects how the carts work and you have to, so everyone had different reasons, but most of them said, oh, nurses are so creative that they're not really using it. We don't want to admit that, but it's like a 30% rate of not using it, so don't do it. So anyway, what happened was right at the end of the 2 days, somebody said, well, what about electronic health records? And they said, well, that can't possibly cause any challenges in a complex system. It's just access to data. It won't affect anything. Literally. And somebody said, well, what about that one study, and I believe it was CHOP, I hope I'm right, where they had stopped the study early because there were some deaths associated with the introduction of an electronic health record. And they said, well, that was the worst. I remember specifically David Costin said this. That was the worst of all the EHRs we've studied in our simulation. We have like 22. Nobody would ever use that system. I'm telling you, these things are fine. And so that's how we got electronic health records in this country. So in some way, Richard was involved in protecting us from doing BCMA first. And the other argument for not doing barcode medication administration first was that they said it relies on the data in electronic health records. So let's go ahead and sort of do 1 and then 2. And I don't know, maybe it would have been okay to implement barcode medication administration. I don't know. I mean, all I know is that Richard's work has influenced so much, and all of the things that all the other presenters have described. This is one tiny little project in Richard's portfolio, like one tiny little thing. And I think he probably wrote that Word document in like, what, 3 hours of thinking? And he was able to see what nobody else in the country could see before it happened. And I just get chills thinking how lucky I was to have access to that just brilliant mind and super kind and wonderful mentor. So I just want to share that I'm deeply grateful to Richard Cook's legacy and particularly for taking me on as a very, very young PhD and being willing to support me as I started. So thank you so much.
Go from being in an agricultural school, medical school, anesthesia, and finally human factors, engineer, not necessarily. What's going on there?
The next
Go
one.
forward. Two forward. There you go.
Okay.
No, it's not. Yep.
To err is not always human. Years ago, I had no knowledge what does it mean human factors. I was in anesthesia, making my own mistakes every day. I was the head of the intensive care unit of Hadassah. We have 3 beds and about 21 mistakes per day. We measure it. And I went to Passover Seder just something like 20 years ago, this time, to my brother, who was the head of psychology at the University of Illinois. And there was another Israeli there. I asked him, what you are doing for a living? He said, you know, this is Danny Goffert, the friend. He said, I'm checking why people are falling from height, why people are making so many accidents. I said, you know what? You have to come to see my environment, because what you are going to see is something unbelievable. And we are having mistakes almost every day with the nursing staff, doctor staff, whatever. Danny came with all his staff, 3 professors of human factors, students in America. I took them through the recovery room, intensive care, operating theater, and I'll never forget what they say to all the medical staff of anesthesia at Hadassah. I worked before, I looked at assembly line, at the power plant. Chaos like this in the medicine, I never saw in my life. Oh, can you help us? And we applied and got the first grant for doing a research. We asked nurses, before we created some kind of a form, that everyone have to report what he thought he did wrong and what happened to them. We collect them, do our analysis, whatever, and we send it, and this was the first draft we sent to a human factor engineering conference. It's called The Nature and Cause of Human Error in the Medical Intensive Care Unit. And Daniel Goffer is the first, Miriam Olin, Badichi, this is his side, and the nurses were part of this. They are on the paper. And we send it, and lo and behold, Human Factor Society, Colorado, 1989, I was the only MD. How many MDs are today here? It's the society. And they put us on the potpourri. They didn't know what to do with us.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
That's actually how Richard Cook realized that I exist. And he invited me to come to Ohio, and David Woods talked with me. And I came over there, and I kept the advertisement because they made a mistake, of course, on the date. And it was 1991. That gave me also the ticket to Annenberg 1. And then I switched to the Technion. I stopped for a year being an anesthetist. It was great. And especially that at the end of this, David Woods and Richard Cook took me to Barnes & Noble and bought me a book. The book is Human Error by James Reason. And since then, I was selling Swiss cheese with holes to everyone in the world. And the nurses gave me a huge plastic Swiss cheese to have on it. But what Richard wrote on the book is Columbus, Ohio. Welcome to consider it as an invitation to the cognitive circles. Now, first time in my life, I knew what is cognitive. Before this, cognitive anesthesiologists don't have cognitive ability. And whenever I was visiting him in Chicago, he took me to a tour in the campus, and we went to the bookstore, very famous bookstore. We have to leave there this is before printing was obsolete. This was there. And we've decided to send this paper to the New England Journal of Medicine, not less than this. We have 7 pages of paper, and we send it to the New England Journal of Medicine, and you put it in the brown envelope, wait for 3 weeks for that before the email application. And what we got from the New England Journal of Medicine is rejection, publication is declined, and the reviewers' comments are provided in the orders. And the New England Journal of Medicine then told us, we are not interested in errors in medicine. Historical, and they suggest to send it to critical care medicine, which we did, without doing any change in the draft, in the paper. And then we got from critical care medicine, why you did not do what the reviewer from the New England told you? Because it was the same reviewer. Which means that there were very few people who were dealing with human factor in medicine. And of course we changed it. I met him later in years, the reviewer. He said, you should do it immediately, not do it. And it was published and became a classical paper, and we found that for each patient in the intensive care unit, we are doing 21, almost an error per day, and that I get my professorship in anesthesia, not in intensive care. And then we decided to do, because now I switch a little bit to you, in fact, to do at Hadassah in our hospital, avoiding human error in the hospital, mission possible. Look at this, quotation mark, exclamation mark, which means we have a question and maybe we have a solution for this. Mission possible, and we invited Richard Cook to come to Jerusalem and gave a talk, and at the end of his perfect talk, he took his little camera then and took a picture here for all those who were attending in this conference, and he said, you will be the prophet or the workers on patient safety. Some of those here really became safety, because there was a difference. So the lawyer part, the lawyers became quality, just a minute. I made it. The lawyers are doing more risk management, and we told them maybe do safety management, and it's separated, and you can see some of the people from this. And
So, oh, hurrah! We have safety. We now know how to get safety.
We have safety. We didn't have enough safety. And I think later, Yuval, you will give your website where we have put together on the YouTube all Richard Cook's very good series of talks about safety. And now Richard and Karen came to visit us in Israel and went to the old city. Once Richard came alone and we were on the top of Masada with a temperature of 48 Celsius, the transfer it to Fahrenheit, where some in the highest, and he called Karen, what are you doing now? She's shoveling snow. And we were there on Masada, and then one day he came to give a talk, and he was a guest at my home, and suddenly, if you can see, there was a bomb in Jerusalem. Explosion, and I was called, I was in charge, and I was called to the hospital. And Richard, I asked him, would you come with me? Yeah, we drove to the hospital, and he was looking around, and he spoke with families, and spoke with my wife. She was in a mass casualty. She has to be transferred from the health, public health to give information, etc., etc. And about a few years later, suddenly, I found a chapter in a book that he sent me the book. The book is Resilience Engineering, which is and there is a chapter taking things things in one stride, cognitive features of two resilience performers. I never knew in my life that I like in Molière, I never knew that I'm speaking resilience. And this is what he wrote in this chapter, which now is a chapter that people, when we are doing a mass casualty courses, people are reading this chapter. And it's written that traveling to a hospital, a senior Israeli physician, DY, Don Chinuel, it's me, you see it here, heard the detonation of the bomb at 10 minutes after 7 and drove with one of the others. RC, this is RC, one of the, to the hospital, to Hadassah and Keren Hospital, to its routine for physicians and nurses to go to their respective hospital whenever it is clear that an attack has taken place. And he was looking. I never saw what he saw in one visit. We did not use his cell phone. I did not use his cell phone. He's talking about me to call the hospital for information, explaining that there was no reason to do so, that he could not participate efficiently by the telephone, and that the senior staff person at the hospital would already be managing the response. DY explained that this was a small attack and that the fact of operating room day had not commended at this time. Anyhow, the way we worked at Hadassah in mass casualties is that we know that there are not so many people are coming to the operating theater, maybe one or two, but most of them are in the intensive care or in the ward. And Don Chinuel noted that the team generally boards a brief information discussion or lessons learned immediately after the mass casualty. The value of the discussion, he said, has fallen off substantially as the handling of such event has become routine. Okay, now I'm in resilience and safety too, and I'm trying to convince, and I'm not selling Swiss cheese anymore. And this is where, when Richard visited to Israel, I think he prepared his lectures at my home in near Jerusalem, and he invited me to be with his family man, with his family, eating very nutritious food in a fast food restaurant, which my wife did not like very much. She's in public health, and it's a family man. And one day we got this letter that he is sick. And he sent this letter, a paragraph from Shakespeare.
When beggars die, the heavens themselves blaze forth the death of princes.
Cowards die many times before their deaths. The valiant never tasted death but once. All the wonders that I yet have heard, it seems to me most strange that men should fear. Seeing that death, a necessary end, come when it will come.
Could you understand what he said? Yeah, I mean, discussing Shakespeare with the disease, and I sent him I read a poem written by Natan Zach, an Israeli, and I sent it to Michael and to Richard, and he read it to him, and you will listen to me with this song, with the translation.
Adam, it's a Sunday. כמו אדם, גם העץ צומח. כמו העץ, אדם נגדל. אני לא יודע איפה הייתי, איפה אהיה. כמו עץ השדה. אהבתי. The God
Thank you.
Great, I'm glad he did. Hopefully that moves us forward. But the other side of Richard is a side that I love and remember, and that's the very human Richard. Many of you may not know this, but I had my third child kind of fast and unexpectedly, and Richard and David were standing outside of the OSU hospital, and I came out very pregnant, and they were having some deep conversation, and hello! Richard wheeled me to the operating room. I had 4 anesthesiologists, something no woman wants in that situation. But he was always
I had the privilege of getting to work a tiny bit with Richard, and I just want to say that he was, I thought he was always very generous with his time, and generous with his intellect, and also generous with credit, giving credit, helping other people up to work on the things that he found were important, which I think were very important. He chose good problems to work on, and he put his heart into them and helped others do the same. He's a good guy.
If nobody else has anything else to say, we can give people 10 minutes back on the day. Thank you, everybody, for coming.